Hi, everyone. Um, my name is Ross Whiteman. I'm the curator and producer of the Yale Sound Art Series. Thank you all so much for being here. Um, I'm really excited, delighted, everything to present Mendi and Keith Obadke and a little bit about their work. Um, Mendi and Keith make music, art, and literature. Their early works include The Sour Thunder, an internet opera, Bridge Records, Crosstalk, American Speech Music, also on Bridge Records, as well as internet art, including Black Net Art Actions, a suite of new media. Works published on Reskin on MIT Press, Big House Slash Disclosure, a 200-hour public sound installation at Northwestern University, Phonotype, a book and CD of media artworks, and a poetry collection, Armor and Flesh, on Lotus Press. They've contributed sounds, music to projects by a wide range of artists, including loops for neo soul singer D'Angelo's first album, and a score for playwright Anna Devere Smith at the Lincoln Center Institute. So I'm really excited to have them here tonight to be talking about their work, um, as well as answering questions at the end. So I'd like to invite you all to in the bottom, if you're new to the Zoom webinar format, it's a little different than the normal Zoom situation. So you'll see at the bottom you'll have a Q&A function. So in there, feel free to write questions throughout the talk as they arise. And when we get to the last kind of 20 or so minutes of the talk, um, I'll kind of moderate those questions and we'll be able to get those answers. And yeah, so without further ado, I'd like to welcome Mendi and Keith up to the virtual stage up here. So thanks so much for being here.
Thank you,
Um,
Thank
Ross.
you.
yeah,
Thank you.
so
Thank you for having us. Thank you for the wonderful introduction.
absolutely. So I'll get out of your hair and excited for all this. And so yeah, put those questions in the chat. See you at the end. Bye,
All
Th-
everyone.
right.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all for coming, and thank you, Ross, for the introduction. We're going to talk a little bit about some of the basic ideas that go into our practice, and then we're going to talk about a few projects. So we've been working together for about 24 years, and we work at the intersection of music, art, and literature. We're particularly interested in the power of listening and how sound articulates spaces. And when we say that, we mean both architectural space and social space. Our work often employs strategies for activating archives, resonating structures, reordering and reorienting language, and sonifying data. There are four big ideas that run through our work. The first is that when we look, we're not just looking with our eyes. What we see is framed by what we hear and by what we think. The second is this: we don't just make sense of sounds in the same way that we make sense of images. When we listen, we make meaning, but a lot of that meaning is stabilized by what we see. You may hear a sound and decide whether it is a train or an orchestra based on what you see before you. The third idea is this: even when we don't have a stabilizing image present, because we're in the dark or because what is making sound is hidden, sounds can have meaning. But in those cases, our memories and emotions have a strong effect on our listening. We make meaning by calling up other times that listening has made us feel or helped us understand something. And then the fourth idea is that the tradition of African American music in general, and the spirituals in particular, are containers for ideas about cosmologies, architecture, philosophy, and temporality, among other ideas. And so when we build our projects, we're thinking about these understandings. We've been working together for all this time. And so these understandings kind of um, came about naturally in our conversations. But we find it might be important to make that plain at the beginning of talking about the word.
So we'll look at a few of our early projects. Tonight we'll start out with some early things, and then we'll get into the things that we're investigating right now. So we'll show you a few images here. Just share the screen. So we started out many years ago making things for the internet. Um, Early on in our practice, Uh, I'll say that I worked as a musician in hip hop in other genres, but doing a lot of studio work and working in hip hop. And Mendi was working as a writer. Um, we then started collaborating with the idea of uh, making operas and artworks for the internet. So an early work we did was a piece called Blackness for Sale, which we attempted to auction my blackness on eBay. And it was up for a few days before eBay pulled the auction. But the project went out with a list of benefits and warnings. And this was part of a larger suite of kind of internet works and performances that we did. Another project is the Interaction of Colors, which was a gate page created for the Whitney Museum. Um, in that project, we remounted that recently, I guess in 2018
Mm-hmm.
for a show at the Whitney, but it was essentially an online brown paper bag test. And if you don't know what a brown paper bag test is, these were tests that have been done, since the 19th century and all through the sort of mid 20th century, maybe even in some ways today. Brown paper bag test is uh, a way of keeping people out of social environments, let's say a party, a social club, by comparing people's skin to a brown paper bag. This test was done in America to African Americans, uh, by white people, by African Americans themselves. And so we created a kind of mock version of this using a HTML code
Mm-hmm.
to specify skin color. Um, there's another project we did around 2003 called The Pink of Stealth. And this was really looking at different ideas about the color pink, all these associations with the color pink from health, wealth, sexuality, all these things were we were kind of meditating on in this piece, and it ended up being a kind of video game and a multi-channel audio piece that we've shown online and in installations. Later, these investigations with color, and we'll spend a little more time on the later projects, but I just want to give you a sense of, how our collaboration started. Our work in color led to a performance piece called Four Electric Ghost, and we call this an opera masquerade. So this was done with singers and musicians. It was commissioned. Let's see, we did the first version of it at Princeton University, and then later did a full production at the Kitchen in New York, and we did a version of it at Carolina Performing Arts in North Carolina. And this was 2009. And so now get to a series that we're still sort of investigating. And this is a piece, this piece is called American Cipher, but this is in a series that we call our Americana Suites.
So the Americana Suites came after these years of working on myth and songs and invisible networks about imaginary places. Um, and we started this series of sound art projects about America. So this piece, American Cipher, was from 2012, but the series began in 2007. Um, in making these public sound artworks about our country, we ask ourselves about funk, austerity, debt, responsibility, aesthetics, and inheritance. We also attempt to reckon with data, that which orders so much of our lives with its presence or absence. We're interested in how data might be understood differently once sonified or made musical. And so we were also kind of taking those ideas about code that we had started in our earlier projects and thinking about what kinds of codes are embedded in the architecture of American culture. So when we got to American Cipher, we were thinking about the DNA, the code that is DNA, and we were particularly interested in American stories about DNA and what it was being used to say.
Uh, so at the center of this project, American Cipher, is a story of Thomas Jefferson and Sally Hemings. And for those who don't know, uh, Sally Hemings was a woman who was enslaved uh, and owned by Thomas Jefferson. She also uh, had a number of children. Uh, and Sally Hemings always said that Thomas Jefferson was the father of her children. The Jefferson family over many years denied this, and then the story became a news story again in the late 1990s when a DNA analysis was done on the Jefferson and Hemings family, and the DNA analysis connected the families definitively.
Mhm.
So our research for this project happened at Monticello. While we were there, we saw this object. We found this bell, sort of. It was on display, but in a corner, and it was the only object there that referenced Sally Hemings. Um, and so that was an interesting thing to us, and that became the center of our project. So we got permission to handle this bell, to ring it and record it. And so we recorded that and built a multi-channel sound piece from that. Uh,
So I don't know if you said that the bell was owned by Sally Hemings and was given to her by Thomas Jefferson's wife, who was her half sister.
yeah, I'll play you a little bit from the project, and you can say more about that dynamic there with the family story. Let's see. So when we first did this project, we did it at Bucknell University in Pennsylvania. Bucknell commissioned the project, and then we later showed it at the Studio Museum in Harlem. So that was a little bit of American Cipher. So we should say the other part of that project were there were a series of prints
Mm-hmm.
um, uh, that displayed poems and stories about DNA.
Mm-hmm. So, we began when we started thinking about this project and building it. We decided to follow through on this idea of inheritance. So the poems deal with the idea of inheritance, and we use the DNA sort of as a score for the sound of the ringing of the bell.
Yeah, and what you could see in the first uh, iteration of the project done at Bucknell University is that they were moving speakers that sort of made a double helix pattern in the physical space. When we did it at the Studio Museum in Harlem, the project sort of centered on, it was anchored around uh, this video piece. Uh, the sound was still spatialized, still moved in the space, but it was not done with the kind of robotic arms and moving speakers in the earlier version. Um, and we'll move ahead and talk about another project in the Americana suites. And this piece was called Free Phase. And we did this project originally mounted in Chicago with the Chicago Cultural Center and Theaster Gates Rebuild Foundation. Um, and it was commissioned by the Center for Black Music Research at Columbia College. And so this project was all about, for us, it was all about freedom songs. And we're looking at freedom songs as they existed in the archive. And we wanted to sort of take these songs, reposition them in public,
Mm-hmm.
for lack of a better term. So the first part of the project, there are three parts of the project. The first part is called Beacon. And Beacon uh, was a signal that we deployed in the city of Chicago three times a day, morning, noon, and evening. And so, in some ways, it functioned like a church bell. In other ways, we'd say like a lighthouse. And so, we'll show you a little bit of the Project Beacon. Let's see.
Are you sharing the screen?
Yeah, so this first version I'm going to show you is from the south side of Chicago at the Rebuild Foundation at the Stony Island Arts Bank. And then we'll show you the Chicago Cultural Center.
Woke up this morning with my mind stayed on freedom. Woke up this morning with my mind stayed on freedom. Woke up this morning with my mind stayed on freedom. Hallelujah, hallelujah, hallelujah. Woke up this morning with my mind.
All right. Next, we'll show you a little bit of what the project looked and sounded like at the Chicago Cultural Center, just so you can get a different perspective on the piece.
Um, so we might say a few things about um, the piece. For the first thing I'll say right now is that in the Chicago Cultural Center version that you just saw, the voices that you heard in the earlier version are still audible, but they're audible from different sides of the building. So they'd be heard if you were standing in the front where the person was holding the rainbow umbrella. You would have heard the voices standing there, but you were hearing the audio from another portion of the another part of the area. So from where those people were standing, you would have heard the bell like sound. And it was an extremely narrow beam. So if you were out of the range of that beam at all, you wouldn't have heard that bell sound. Um, we had three different songs for the three different times of day that Beacon went off, and as we said earlier, we were really investigating what it was like to be in an environment where where these songs that were referencing temporal information will be played in relation to that. So this was the noon bell that was referencing having woken up with my mind stayed on freedom. The evening one was keep your lamps trimmed and burning. And so, different times of day, you have songs that are referencing something that's supposed to happen at a time of day. Um, and it played repeatedly during those times so that you could in that environment if you pass that beam you would be called to be in a mind state of thinking about time through this music.
And we should also say, because I think, I neglected to mention at the beginning, like what a freedom song
Oh yeah.
is. So a lot of people might know the idea of African American spirituals, but usually when, people are using the phrase freedom songs, what we mean is how these songs were reconfigured during the civil rights movement. So the songs were reworked and reinterpreted uh, for protest. I mean, you could argue that they were always a kind of protest music, but many of the lyrics were updated during the 1960s to address the struggle in that moment. And so we were really interested in this political remix strategy that people did uh, during the movement. Uh, and part of what we're dealing with in Beacon is how absent this kind of material is. I would say, black political sounds, black spiritual sounds, how absent these things are from public spaces, right? So, you hear things like church bells, all over the United States, but even from African American churches, you don't hear, uh, you know, the songs, uh, 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 the spirituals, that canon, or definitely not things that we might consider songs from the struggle. Uh, so we're interested in how these sounds move in public spaces and how they might be identified. And so, we notice things like in downtown Chicago, these sounds blended in with other things like them, meaning that if people heard church bells around them, then they might assume that this was another church bell. But, we shaped this in some ways so that it would stand out in some ways from other bell like sounds. When we played it from Rebuilt Foundation, we noticed that some people would hear a song, and they would sing along with it. They would finish a line. Um, so that was an indication to us that oh, so maybe this is calling up memories for some people. And so we were interested in all the
Mm-hmm.
ways that people engage with the sound.
Mm-hmm. And
Uh,
there are also fewer public sonic sounds from the South End in that way. I mean, from a building or from a like a church bell sound.
I mean, things that were made to be public.
Things that
Yeah.
were made. They're all kind of there are public sounds, but there's a kind of space that this kind of bell sound takes up that is unique.
Uh, and so things like a church bell might be seen as kind of innocent, innocuous sound, but as we were putting this up, this project was supported by Columbia College, as we mentioned, but it also received support from the city. The Chicago Cultural Center is a city
Mm-hmm.
organization. And so, right, we had no trouble as we were developing the project. We had a lot of support and people were on board. But right as the project started to go up, like right as we were mounting the parabolic speaker, we got a lot of questions about what the content was and exactly what it was going to do. and we didn't know what that was about at first, and then we realized, oh, like the mayor was in the middle of a reelection campaign. Rahm Emanuel was trying to get reelected, and they were concerned that maybe some content in the work might reflect poorly on the city. And all we could say is like, I mean, we don't know. um, uh, Another part of this project is a piece called Overcome. It was Overcome. It was a video piece. It's a video piece and a four-channel audio piece. And in this work, we placed a lot of accelerometers and contact mics around the Edmund Pettus Bridge. And for anyone who doesn't know, the Edmund Pettus Bridge is the site of 1965's Bloody Sunday, all right, where civil rights activists, marchers were attacked by the police in Selma, Alabama. And so we went to that site. We've seen that site, from
All our lives
all
from
of our lives
footage.
from film footage, right? From
Hmm.
black and white film footage, and that's the way many of us have seen it. Maybe if you've seen a documentary about the civil rights movement, but we wanted to go there and see what it felt like and hear what it sounded like for ourselves and really deal with the structure.
Hmm.
And so we recorded the sounds of the structure, and then we use those things to sort of do our own interpretation of the freedom song "We Shall Overcome." So we'll just show you about 2 minutes of that piece. And so, as we mentioned, that piece would uh, typically we show it, as a projection in a gallery space with four channels of sound. Um, when we showed it at the Chicago Cultural Center, it was essentially in a movie theater with quadraphonic sound.
Hmm.
And the full piece is 10 minutes long. So it's a 10-minute piece that plays on a loop. Um, we're going to move ahead now and talk about some other series. We'll talk about our praise songs now.
Okay.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, so we've done a couple of different kinds of praise songs. Some of them are well, I don't know where I should begin. I mean, in 2015, we did a praise song for James Baldwin, and we did it at the University Center of the new school around the facade of the building. So sides of the building.
We should say that all of our praise songs are, dedicated
Oh
to
yeah,
other artists or
visionaries.
visionaries, people whose work has inspired us and the world in some way. And so, as Mendi was mentioning, in 2015, we did a piece about James Baldwin, and it was commissioned by the Vera List Center for Art and Politics and Harlem Stage. And at this time, there were a number of projects around New York City that were being mounted to celebrate, the work and the legacy of James Baldwin. And so our piece focused on a short story, an early short story by James Baldwin called Sonny's Blues. Uh, that piece we used to kind of guide us to other references, sonic references in James Baldwin's work. And with that as a starting place, we created this kind of 24 channel piece that Mindy was mentioning. Um, so the title of the piece is called Blues Speaker for James Baldwin. So we'll show you the documentation from that project.
Freedom lurked around us, and I understood at last that he could help us be free if we would listen, and he would never be free until we did. It wasn't like living with a person at all. It was like living with sound, and the sound didn't make any sense to her. Didn't make any sense to any of them, naturally.
Um, so to say a few things about that, the piece that you just saw was it took place on three different sides of the building, and the different sides you would have heard somewhat different um, sounds on different sides, and then also over time. The piece is 12 hours long, so you would hear different kinds of sounds over those hours. Um, there's some um, there's some field recordings and musical phrases, as well as the bits and pieces of the story. Um,
There are also elements from Baldwin's nonfiction writings that sort of mirror some things happening in the fiction, and so sometimes
mhm,
we're mirroring those things on different sides of the building. So he's exploring an idea about looking out onto the world in the fiction, and then the same kind of thing is happening in the nonfiction writing, and so we're literally sort of panning sort of narrative elements and concepts
mhm,
in the installation too. Um, the other part of this project is that we had a number of musicians who deal with the blues in their work. We had them come and read the story in the space, and
and
this
they
was
approached it really differently, which was interesting.
yeah. So we had Carmen Mayette Johnson. We had Brandon Ross from the band Harriet Tubman and Melvin Gibbs from the band Harriet Tubman. And so
Mhm,
they all approached the story much in the way that they would sort of approach sort of improvising on their instruments.
mhm,
So Karma is a vocalist and a songwriter and a poet. Um, Brandon Ross is a guitarist and Melvin Gibbs is a bass player. And so they all kind of approached it sort of in their own musical way. Uh,
mhm.
uh, Next, I know we're a little short on time, so we're going to talk about a couple of ideas quickly. Next is our number series, and these projects are uh, a series of pieces where we're sonifying databases, and specifically databases related to violence. Um, the first in this was a piece called Number Station Furtive Movements. And we'll show you a little bit of that and we can talk more about what it is later. But this piece used stop and frisk data uh, from the NYPD. And this data was collected and distributed by the New York ACLU. But we took these numbers and we sonified them and performed them in a gallery space, and our performance remained in the space as an installation later. So we'll show you just, about a minute and a half of number station furtive movements.
40,
07,
151,
009,
383,
010,
277,
013,
193,
014,
409,
017,
92,
018,
167,
019,
105,
020,
157,
023,
379,
024,
175,
025,
255,
026,
212,
028,
190,
030,
186,
032.
1.
Okay, so that's a little bit of number station furtive movements. We've done other works in this series dealing with different databases. So we've done Number Station Red Record, which looks at lynching statistics taken from the writings of Ida B. Wells Barnett. So Ida B. Wells Barnett was a journalist who, when she did this, when she did her Red Record book, it was in the 1890s.
1895, I think, it was published. Mhm.
Um, so she collected uh, data from police reports and from newspapers. It was essentially a kind of 19th century data mining project. And
Mhm.
so we wanted to revisit this project that Ivy Wells Barnett did. For anyone who doesn't know her, she's a well-known activist uh, who did a lot of work related to this, but the Red Record was really a pioneering work that we wanted to kind of revisit in sound. Um, Another iteration in the series is Number Station Manifest, which will look at databases from slave ship manifest and primarily from the port of New Orleans. Uh, and so we performed that at Friedman Gallery.
So with all of these projects, we gave ourselves the challenge of, um, of the constraint of dealing only with the numbers from these databases, and to think about ordering them in the ways that we could perform them musically, and also how in a way that we could feel them, perform them musically so that we could feel them. Um, and so with each of these databases, the numbers do different things. And so that approach changes, but in all of them, um, in the performance of the databases, we learn new things. That the practice of doing this shows us new things that we may not have thought about or allow ourselves to feel. And so that is the purpose of the project.
And just to say a little bit more about how we're actually sonifying these things. So, if we have a low number in the database, meaning a small number, then it's a low frequency sound, right? If we have a high number, then we sonify it as a high frequency sound. So if we have a number 100, then we're making a 100 hertz tone. All right. But simplifying a little bit, but that's essentially how each iteration is working. And this is a series that we're still continuing. So we performed at Friedman Gallery, Ryan Lee Gallery, at the Met Museum, and at MCA Chicago. And so we're still continuing this series. And next, we're going to go to what we've been working on in the last sort of year and a half, which are a series of projects about light. So do you want to say?
So yeah, last year we did two projects that kind of mirror each other about light. I don't know which one Keith is about to start with.
Book of Light.
The first one is Book of Light, which is a sound and light show that we did at in Pittsburgh, and we were telling stories and singing songs about light. And then the images come. The images are inspired by conversations that we had with a scientist by the name of Leon Zhao, who's working with bioluminescence. Well, we came to him to talk about bioluminescence, and so his work involves
expansion microscopy.
Expansion microscopy. That's not what I was going to say. Though.
Sorry.
Signaling between cells is what I was going to say. Which his work allows us to think about and see things in new ways. But in sharing images with us, we used this palette and the conversations that we had about visualizing these processes so the images come from that. But our idea for these two projects that we're going to talk about was to think about internal light. And so
so we'll show you a little bit of the Book of Light performance.
Sheds her name after the darkness slides away. I see the light finally break, singing me out to take their rest. I see the blue of light on the crest. Feel the curve flow. Magic may come down. Hear the high winds blow. Sunlight to make shadow. Sunlight.
going to be talking about the struggle for freedom. Because I don't think we're ever going to get there. I don't think we will ever reach a point where we can say we are free. Right?
All right, so that's just a little bit of Book of Light. Those are a few excerpts from the piece. The total piece is about 45 minutes long, but those are sort of some cuts from some different sections of that project.
And so, alongside with that, this is in the art. That the outside was the art building at Carnegie Mellon, and inside we did an installation called Anyanwu. Anyanwu is for the project. Anyanwu is a sound and fabric project, um, also dealing with internal light. But we were honoring the women of the civil rights movement, and 5 women in particular: Fannie Lou Hamer. Um, Claudette Colvin, Ivy Wells Barnett,
Diane, Diane Nash.
Diane Nash, Ella Baker. Did I name all 5 of them?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. And there's something else I was going to say. Oh, Anyanwu is the name of an Igbo deity who's a sun goddess, and the name Anyanwu means eye of light.
Yeah. So here's a little bit of what Anyan will look like in the space. So as Mindy mentioned, Book of Light happened outside of that building, and Anyan was how we treated the internal space.
Got the light of freedom. Got the light of freedom. Got the light of freedom. I have got the light of freedom. I'm gonna let it shine. Let it shine. Let it shine. Let it shine. Got the light of freedom. Got the light of freedom. Got the light of freedom. I have got the light of freedom. Gonna let it shine. Let it shine. Let it shine. Let it shine.
So the impetus for both of those projects was thinking about This Little Light of Mine, Freedom Song, and that the concept of internal light in each of them, and just wanting to explore that through different approaches.
Yeah, and so we're running a little short on time. We'll show you one last piece that's in this uh, series that we're doing on light. This is a piece that we just showed at Friedman Gallery again, and this is we'll show you about a minute and a half of it. This is a video and 4-channel sound work, and once again, it's a meditation on the sun, but sort of from a different perspective. So we're dealing with slightly different histories and mythologies here. But this piece, once again, is called The Sun.
The sun will shine on those who stand before it shines on those who kneel under them. The sun will shine on those who stand before it shines on those who kneel under them. لأن العين on O's U and E or it ends on O's U il M E E I A O U E O E I A O U E this whoosh
Okay, so that was just a little bit of the sun. Um, and last, before we take questions, I'll just say, a piece that we're working on now that we're going to show with the Sound Art Series and Art Space New Haven is a new piece called Lift, and it's our sort of our take on what's often called the Negro National Anthem, Lift Every Voice and Sing. And so we're thinking about that. We're thinking about that actual piece of music and the poem that it came from. And we're thinking about the history of aerial photography and elevation and all of these things. And so that we'll be showing that piece in February. We're screening that piece, coming to a screen near you. Okay, so we'll stop there. And if anyone has any questions, we're happy to talk about it.
Yeah.
Cool. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
So, by the way, before I forget to say this, because we have a distinguished guest with us, the next event in this series is going to be December 7th with Pamela Z and Mia Masaoka. And actually, Pamela is in the Q&A and has just
Oh, I see. Hey,
Yeah.
Pamela.
been complimenting the last work a lot. So I just wanted to make sure you received that compliment.
Hey, Pamela. She's just teaching your work.
Yeah.
We love you, Pamela.
So yeah, make sure you tune in. I think it's 5 p.m. Saturday, Monday, December 7th. There'll be more info online about that soon. By the way, if you haven't already, you can follow at Yale CCAM on Instagram, or get in contact with me, Ross Whiteman, about the future of this series. But anyway, back to this. I'd like to field one question by our friend Brian Kane, who wrote, "Hi, Mendi and Keith. Nice to see both of you, and I wish we could all be in person. My question is I'm interested in your discussion of freedom songs. What are some of the sources that you are drawing upon for the freedom songs? Core freedom singers, Odetta, Fannie Lou Hamer, and so on come to mind. Are there particular sources, remix artists, to use your phrase, that have mattered to you, that are your quote ancestors, or simply need more attention, recognition?"
That's a great question.
Yeah.
You certainly named like some of the, major sources. Yeah, the core singers, core freedom singers. Sweet Honey the Rock are always a go-to for us when we're looking at how people have reinterpreted.
And Bernice Johnson Reagan's writing and research, has been a guide as well.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know if it's fair to say as well, since she's in two of those groups, but
yeah, I would say the staple singers are a major sort of source or influence for us. I mean, Mavis Staples' solo work and sort of very specific ideas that come from Pop Staples' approach to
John Work and
John Work, yeah. John Work, who the musicologist, turn of the century musicologist, worked at Fisk University, who is really responsible for bringing a lot of the spirituals forward. So yeah, those are some of the sources. Yeah.
So my Zoom just crashed. Sorry, it just
Oh.
disappeared. I was like, oh my God. I thought it hit 8 o'clock and the thing shut down. I was like, oh no. So yeah, Zoom crashed unexpectedly.
Yeah.
Um,
We just finished Brian's question.
Yeah.
Sweet.
We could have talked about those influences all night, but
Yeah, I mean, I was like, I'm still thinking of more.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I saw that it looked like Conrad had a question next. Since I disappeared, my Q&A
Oh,
is
let's
is
see.
wiped now.
Let's see.
I'm
Okay.
curious about.
So I guess I can't read
Go ahead.
I can't read the questions out loud
No, no.
anymore.
I can
Sorry
read
about
out,
that.
comrades.
Okay.
I'm curious on how the current COVID situation of remote
thanks, Lou.
interaction / social distancing has impacted your work, specifically with regards to how, on the one hand, sound can be one of the few safe ways to interact / engaging with other people, but on the other hand, how much of the installation work is participatory and experienced in a specific physical space with the corresponding social context. How does this translate to virtual spaces? Amazing work. Thank you guys.
Thank you for the question. I mean, interestingly, one thing we tried to point out in the talk was that we started out our early collaborations were doing things online, and that's where we were mentally. And over the
Yeah.
years, we moved more and more into physical spaces, and so going back online has been a little interesting because we're still very much dealing with site specific soundings.
Mm-hmm.
And we're thinking about how to do uh, things these days. I mean, this project Lift is sort of a response to that. Thinking about the shared airspace and all this above us. The sun is kind of how we
Yeah.
as part of that.
I mean, the sun was an interesting case because when it was originally shown, it was shown uh, inside this gallery space, working with working remotely. It was broadcast from a gallery space, but we weren't there, and so but a lot of our work. Well, it does different things, and so we're always responding to different new situations. It's definitely different. Um, but a large part of our work, of the conceiving of it and the recording of it, happens between the two of us, and we're not
Yeah,
necessarily.
yeah. So our kind of base collaboration hasn't changed much, right? Because we spend a lot of time in the studio working together. Obviously, collaborating with all of our friends who are musicians and dancers and designers like that, hasn't been happening quite as much.
Mhm.
Uh, Making natural field recordings has become much easier, right? There are a lot of quiet spaces that you can go to, and there are not always people there. Some natural spaces are very heavily trafficked these days, but yeah, so we're reconfiguring like everybody else and thinking
Yeah.
about how to get the most out of this unusual time. Yeah.
Mhm.
It's kind of a follow-up to that. I wonder, with a lot of that internet work, it was upwards of a decade ago. So now with the kind of rapid changing of the internet and what that's like, I wonder how, is there any kind of new technology in regards to the internet that you're eager to work with, or how has that kind of inspiration back then transferred to inspiration to now with what the internet can do?
Yeah. I mean, one thing that I'll say, all of our work is in some ways low tech. I mean, all of our stuff is pretty simple because we like it to last in some ways and not break too often, and it's got to move around a lot. Um, so when we did things on the internet back in the day, even if the thing started out, I mean, sometimes the thing started out kind of complex, and then we sort of whittled it down to the simplest version of itself possible. And so I feel like we're still doing that um, today. At least we try. We try to do it. We try to make the simplest version of these things possible. Um, are there things that we want to do on the internet today? I think we're thinking about it. Like we're watching other people who are doing like sort of interesting internet-based things. I don't feel like it's quite calling us yet.
Well, I mean, we did a piece that we didn't get to talk about, called Lull, which was an 8 hour piece, and so it was overnight sleep piece. And in some ways, that it's not the doing it over the internet has not been the only way we've imagined it, but it is. like it's not a new piece of technology that makes it possible, but there are ways in which that makes sense in that context. You know what I mean? So it's not so much about technology that makes it possible, but about what's happening now that makes people might want something that can help them sleep. I mean, I don't know if help them sleep is really the thing that it does, but a piece that encourages sleep or meditates on sleep. And so that's not really, it's a technology, not so much because something new allowed us to make it, but because we did like kind of investigate, sounds that um, make you drowsy or like paces and times that um, um, interact with the human
Speech cadences.
speech cadences, things that and those are a technology, so it's not a new technology. In some ways, they're very old technologies, but we're able to use them in a different way because of the moment.
I mean, I'll also say that, usually the way we start things is like we have something that we're trying to, a feeling that we're trying to get at. And then if there is a new technology involved, like it grows out of that. Like we're trying to get a feel, and then we'll find something like, when we had the moving speakers in uh, American Cipher, like that was like, we'd work with sort of moving speakers before, but we're really thinking like, how do you give people the sense of a helix of sound? And so a robotic arm was the easiest way to do that, but it wasn't. Yeah, we weren't really guided by the
Mm-hmm.
tech itself. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. And then Dana, who is the director of CCAM, thanks Dana for having us.
Hey, Dana, long time no
Hi.
see.
Dana asks, thank you. Can you speak about your collaborative process? What are some of the breakthroughs, quirks that have been milestones for your work?
Hmm.
Let's see, a collaborative process. Yeah, I mean, there's some things that are constant. I think in that all of our projects grow out of a dialogue, just a conversation that we're having together, and then in some ways, we just kind of make that dialogue public,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like a lot of our projects are just a kind of a public airing or public inviting the public to engage in a dialogue that we're having. Yeah.
Yeah.
The only difference from that is like projects. We showed this piece, Four Electric Ghosts, that was like a music theater piece. That involves many other collaborators. So that's a kind of different thing where we literally have many, many sort of
Mm-hmm.
design meetings.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and there's a lot of stuff under the hood that the public doesn't see. But many of our other projects, we're kind of showing people our
Yes.
conversations, and we're showing what's under the hood.
I mean, in fact, a piece of free phase, that goes with Beacon and Overcome is actually a dialogue that is not our dialogue, but we made dialogues a literal part of the project that didn't involve us
Yeah.
directly.
It's called Dialogue with DJs, where you know people sit down with a DJ and talk about what's interesting to them about this archive of freedom songs. So they listen to a song together and then talk about it. And so,
Yeah. So it
so
was a guided conversation, that we kind of sculpted. But then what happened was not, they went other places, and that comes out of our always saying that the work is dialogue. I don't know if that answers the question.
so what else could we say about our collaboration? Um, I would say the other thing is that um, our roles in the collaboration change a lot from project to
Yeah.
project. And so there's some, the dialogue is a constant thing, but like who starts a project or who does what part of a project, that changes with every project.
Hmm.
Um,
And those two answers are connected. It's because a lot of times a project comes out of a very long conversation, a years long conversation, and so by the time we're making it public, who does what depends on other things.
and then the last part of that, last thing I'll add to that is that collaborating with institutions is a really
Yeah.
big part of the process for us, and something that we enjoy, and something that uh, it's just a major part of the thing. So we're not sort of just in the studio making things and then we show them to the world. Like we're in dialogue with together, then we enter into a dialogue with an institution. Often it's an institution that's commissioning the work. Sometimes it's just an institution that is hosting a showing of the work, and that's an important part of the process for
Or
us.
who manages something, some part, some archive. We have to ask access for, like, they're often, it's often multi-layered, the numbers of institutions that we interact with, and we've come to think of that as part of the work. Yeah.
Awesome. We've got 3 more questions,
Great.
which is great. Thank you all for being here and asking questions. Sometimes it's hard in Zooms to get people to not be shy. So thank you. The next question comes from Karine or Karen. Hopefully I'm pronouncing your name correctly.
Karen.
Karen, yeah. So Karen says, I loved your talk and
Hey,
was
Karen.
tonight particularly intrigued by how you describe data as that which allows you to look at things that are otherwise extremely difficult to look at, like police violence. Can you speak more about abstraction and how you navigate emotional resonance and abstraction or structure?
Um, yeah, I mean, I feel like I have a very straightforward approach to that in the project, but I don't know if I can zoom out and talk about abstraction generally. I mean, I think the place where it's abstract for me is at the very beginning of saying we're going to talk about, we're going to do something that's about slavery or slave ships, but we're not going to use words other than numbers. Just that. I mean,
or images.
or images. I think I could tell you about the why of that. There are things that those words don't access, but we feel like we have access to them because there's narrative there, um, in images or words, and the numbers. And sometimes it's just that there are so many numbers, and it's impossible to like look at all of them and distinguish one from the next, or think about them differently. But saying yes to the constraint, and doing it publicly, I think, is where other thoughts and feelings come in for me, and also meaning for it to mean something. So the idea that I don't want to lose that it's about something, just because I'm only saying the numbers, is another part that I think makes something happen.
Yeah, I mean, I think with the numbers station and the number series works in general, it's about making something that uh, making sort of giving us a way to emotionally deal with these databases. I mean, the intent of putting out a lot of this data related to violence, let's say specifically the stop and frisk data, the NYPD dumped this data with the idea that people would not be able to process all of this, right? You're looking at more than a decade of statistics related to uh, police violence. Uh, and in some way, we think by sort of pointing to the numbers and allowing people just to sort of listen to those numbers in a kind of intimate space, kind of close proximity recording, um, it can give us more access uh, than obviously reading these numbers or even seeing an image or sort of recreating, visuals related to it. It allows us to take it in a different kind of way and hopefully make it visceral.
Yeah, I mean, I think each of the databases has a different challenge and a different um, set of possibilities,
And a texture.
and a texture. Yeah, I mean, I think so. For example, with the Red Record, it's not a data dump. We are supposed to, Ida B. Wells Barnett actually puts it together so that we can do something. So it's different, from the NYPD, that even then the NYCLU's um, making public of the NYPD numbers. Um, but what's similar about it is that a lot of times we don't have any more information than 3 people died here on this date. There's not always there's always missing information, and so the numbers allows us to relate to what is there without the feeling that we have the whole story. The words sometimes give you the sense that this is the story, right? But there's always something that's not there anyway. Um, and so I think um, the lack of completeness that numbers alone make us aware of is important. It's important in the work. It's helpful to us to spend time with that.
Awesome. And a related question from Ed. Ed writes, some of my students were asking about the process of taking data and mapping it to sound in the Number Station series. Can you talk about that project and more generally about your process for finding a path from the artifact site data to the material forms found in your work? Lovely to hear you talk as always.
Hey,
Hey.
Ed. Good to hear you, read you.
Yes.
Uh, yeah, see the process there. I mean, when we started the number stuff, we had a lot of questions about how we might, deal with sonifying these things, and we we tried a number of different ways. We tried sort of automating the process. We tried uh, working with different textures of sound. I mean, what we ended up doing is doing things by hand. And what I mean by doing things by hand is, literally going through all the numbers. I mean, we've rewritten the numbers many times, physically, but also literally just sort of taking a number and generating a sine tone from it. Like we wanted to get these things, a sine tone for anybody who doesn't work with audio. I mean, it feels like this most basic aural unit, is a sort of core, uh, a unadorned sound. And um, so we wanted something that, both in some ways felt electronic and in some ways like a quote unquote pure sound, and also something that was done by hand in some way. And
Mhm.
so we wanted to also present the voice in that kind of very direct way.
Yeah, and in terms of the voice, there's always a counterpoint. We always go back and forth between our voices, and so um, the part of the approach is to say like how are how are there numbers that are different from each other that our voices can take on. So there are a couple of different ways of hearing the sounds of the numbers that are at play. Uh, and I think there's a play between those, between his voice and my voice, and our voices and the sign tones.
And that's where the other place where, more overt expressive stuff is done is how these sign tones are positioned spatially,
Mm-hmm.
right? And how they're processed. So sometimes they're extremely reverberant. Sometimes there are moments where things get extremely dry and present. And so that's one place where we allow ourselves to kind of be expressive with this kind of raw sound.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Awesome. And then for the grand finale, we have a question from T. Burkett.
Hey,
Do you
T.
have a conceptual place where you start each project, your aesthetic, a set process to start your work? Sorry if this was covered earlier, just signing on. Thanks.
Hey.
Hey,
Um,
it's not a set place.
no.
We have probably like a lot of people, we have tons and tons of sketchbooks, so sometimes literally just ideas written down, approach this idea X way, you know, little drawings, fragments of poems. So we have tons of those things that we've produced over the years. And I imagine that's how a lot of people work. And then, as we said, like the relationship to institutions is really important for us. And so often we're pursuing a relationship with different institutions, or we're waiting until something interesting comes our way, and then we'll look through all of our ideas and see, does this idea that we've been exploring, does it meet with this site or with this institutional partnership in an interesting way?
And also, I mean, I've never really used this language, but because we have these ongoing conversations, so sometimes it's a sketch, sometimes it's literally an old conversation that we are carrying forth. The other question is like, do we want to have this conversation, with this institution? That's, another, like, will it fit the needs? But also, you know, um, is this institution an interlocutor for this conversation that we want to have?
For example, when we did the Blues Speaker project, the piece dealing with James Baldwin's writing, um, Mendi had written about Baldwin's writing and specifically about Sonny's Blues probably 20 years before that.
Yeah.
And so we had a kind of general sketch of some kind of Baldwin-esque idea,
Mm-hmm.
but then when the Realist Center approaches and Harlem Stage approaches, about possibly exploring something with Baldwin. It seemed like the right time and place because of Baldwin's association with the New School, because of the Fearless Center's history of work, because of Harlem Stage, because Baldwin's old neighborhood and his relationship to the city. So all of those things came together in a perfect way, and so we kind of look for those kind of magical moments, and then jump into the sketchbook.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much, especially for being so generous with your time. I realize we've gone quite over, but thanks.
No, thank you.
Thanks so much to the audience as well for having
Thank you.
such great
Thank you all.
questions.
It's so good to see so many friends in the virtual house.
Yes.
Yeah. So I guess maybe can we talk a bit about the event in February, or is it too?
Let's see.
Maybe there will be something that will happen in the future. We might not talk about it right now. Sorry.
Yeah, there's something that's happening.
You sort of mentioned it.
Right now we're calling the project Lift. Right, that's the working title. It may stick. We're doing it, in collaboration with CCAM, but also with Art Space New Haven. Yeah. What did I say? Something?
No, you didn't. You didn't.
Yeah, sorry if I did also.
No.
So Mendi has to watch me because I like working out projects in public in front of everybody.
And I do not.
I will ask everybody what they think about some version of an idea. Other things. What else can I say about it?
You can say whatever you want to say.
Okay. So yeah, I mean, yeah. We're dealing with this song, Lift Every Voice and Sing, and we're kind of interested in how that is somehow used as a spiritual, but it's also like a 20th century composition by a composer and a poet, so it's a composed piece that I think was intended to enter the archive. That's kind of fascinating to us. But yeah, those are the things we know so far.
Cool. So yeah, keep up with the Sound Art Series, and there will be an event, probably a virtual one, as everything is these days, happening in February. And I'm just so thrilled to be part of making that happen and working with you all in whatever capacity we can call this. Yeah.
Yes. Thank you for the invitation to play. We're always happy to.
Yeah, play. Absolutely. So, I guess with that, just again, thanks to CCAM, thanks to Dana Carwas, the director, for having us. Thanks to Leo, who came in with the question when I couldn't ask it before.
Thank you.
He's also been helping with the tech stuff. And the next event will be, as I mentioned before, with Pamela Z and Mia Masaoka on December 7th at 5 p.m. And there'll be more noise about that on the internet. So if you don't already follow at Yale CCAM on Instagram, or I think there's a mailing list. If you go to the Yale CCAM website, you can sign up for a mailing list, and all of our events will be up there. So all that aside, thank you so very much. This was awesome, and it was great to hear more about some of your work I was unfamiliar with as well. So this is great.
Thank you.
So cool. All right.
Take care, everybody. Thank you.
See you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.